Welcome everyone to Baraza Media Lab. My name is Christine Mungai. I always introduce myself as a writer and journalist. And I'm also the lead curator and director here at Baraza Media Lab. The reason I start my introduction with the journalism bit is because that's really at the heart of everything I do professionally, all about storytelling and making meaning of our lives. So today is May 2nd, tomorrow is World Press Freedom Day, but it's been a tough couple of weeks in Kenya, with some of the worst flooding that we've seen in years, hundreds dead, thousands displaced. And this has been the result of many interlinked factors. We can talk about population pressure, we can talk about poor urban planning, and dismal disaster preparedness from authorities. But at the heart of this is that there's just more rain this time around. It's an interlinking between the El Nino weather phenomenon, which is a cyclical weather pattern, which has been turbocharged by climate change. And this results in more frequent and more extreme weather events, as we've seen over the past couple of weeks. This year's theme for World Press Freedom Day creates the linkage and the connection between press freedom and climate change. For many Africans, the effects of climate change are not a far-off risk. It's not something that we're waiting to see in years and decades to come, but it's an imminent, current, daily, ongoing threat on our lives. Here's what we know. Africa is the continent most vulnerable to the negative effects of climate change, despite its historic low contribution to greenhouse gas emissions. That we know. That 7 out of 10 of the countries most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change are in Africa. What's at risk is everything. The continent's ecosystems, livelihoods, infrastructure, agriculture, food systems. Our lives are on the line. But what we know less concretely is that environment and climate reporting is one of the most dangerous beats that a reporter can be assigned to. It's almost at the level of risk as reporting on organized crime. That's because reporting on climate change and the environment is actually frequently exposing companies and corrupt actors that have protection from political actors, that have complicity with governments, and it makes the climate a story that is almost at the level of reporting on criminal gangs and mafias. Journalists who cover environment and climate stories face a range of serious threats on their lives. This includes physical attacks, arrests and detention, legal harassment, so authorities weaponizing the law against them, online harassment and hate campaigns, restriction on freedom of movement, and challenges accessing information. All this is from a recent report by the International Press Institute. It means that certain stories that are in the public interest end up being effectively off limits for journalists due to the dangers associated with covering them. And we know that this censorship silences vital public interest information that we'll go into more deeply on our panel this morning. But that's not all. Reporting on climate change also means navigating climate misinformation and disinformation fueled by politically motivated campaigns. I recently came across a report by Internews that surveyed the practices, habits, and approaches of climate journalists in the region. And the report found an alarming lack of understanding on the issue in the first place, with most of the respondents in the survey not being able to articulate the basic concepts of climate change. And even more alarming was that the 2/3 of the journalists surveyed, and this survey actually covered over 600 journalists in East Africa, they found that 2/3 of the journalists surveyed felt the need to include the views of climate change skeptics or deniers in their stories in a bid to create balance in the story. So they end up inadvertently, frequently, actually amplifying disinformation and misinformation. So this idea that balance is an imperative that we have to have doesn't mean that we should include false and misleading narratives in our stories, but that's what the survey found was happening. These papers. Okay. I want to iterate what our friends at Internews in that survey highlighted as their recommendations. First, they said that there's a huge scope for a lot more in-depth reporting on climate change, whether it's examining the impacts, looking at solutions, or investigating the drivers and the causes of the weather phenomena that we are seeing. Secondly, the report recommended that journalists should establish relationships with climate experts in order to access accurate and credible information on the subject. And this could lead to better and more data journalism on the subject. We haven't seen much data journalism on climate change in Africa, and there's a huge opportunity for that. And lastly, for now, is that journalists should collaborate with one another to integrate climate stories into other stories, into broader stories about politics, about business, about society. So a climate story isn't just a weather story, it's also a bigger story about how we live. So I'd like to push that idea a little bit further and argue that climate reporting is not just affecting business, politics, and society. I want to push that a little further and actually argue that nearly almost every story in 2024 might actually be a climate story. I'm reminded of the story that came out early last year on the cult leader in Malindi, Shakahola, who lured his followers into a death cult and had been, allowed to operate for many years, with the authorities being very lenient and negligent on what was happening there. That's a story about religious extremism. It's a story about poverty. It's a story about many things, but I would argue that perhaps those followers were unable to see a future on their farms and with their livelihoods that they had, with harvests having failed and again and again. So a lot of times what could be a story about politics or religion or business actually does have a climate link. And I'm sure our panel today will give more examples and elaborate on this, drawing from their experience. I want to end right here and say, well, every good speaker ends 3 times, but I'm only going to end once. I'm going to quote Rebecca Solnit, who is a writer and essayist. And she says, and I quote, that every crisis is, in part, a storytelling crisis. Every crisis is a storytelling crisis. And this couldn't be more true about what we're talking about today. People have called the climate crisis the crisis of our lives, of this generation. And I want to quote Rebecca Solnit a bit more extensively here. I think her words are worth quoting in full. She says that in order to do what the climate crisis demands of us, we need to change our stories. We need to find stories of a livable future, of popular power. We need stories that motivate people and do what it takes to make the world that we need. This crisis means changing our relationship to the physical world, to our environment. And that means changing how we think about pretty much everything. How we think about wealth, power, joy, time, space, value. How we think about what constitutes a good life, what matters, and how change itself happens. That's why we're convening this conversation here at Baraza Media Lab. And I want to thank our in-person audience today and for those of you who are following along on the live stream. We seek to foster more responsible and impactful reporting. And it's what we care about. It's what we care about here at Baraza. That's supporting the media ecosystem, promoting press freedom, disrupting harmful narratives, and promoting creative advocacy in Africa. With that, I'm going to invite Beryl Ringos, our moderator today, who will invite up our panel. My name is Christine Mungai, lead curator here at Baraza Media Lab. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine, for that elaborate introduction to today's World Press Freedom Day. So my name is Beryl Ringos, as introduced by Christine. I'll be the panel moderator today. So without wasting more time, I'll go ahead and introduce our panel of experts. And of course, well, help me in joining our panel of experts on stage. I'll be joined by Rosemary Mwangi, manager, content regulation from Communications Authority. Rosemary, welcome on stage. I'll also be joined by Rosalia Omungo, CEO, Editors Guild. Please help me welcome Rosalia on stage as well. And lastly, I am joined by award-winning investigative journalist, John Allan Namu, who's also the founder and CEO of Africa Uncensored. And as I welcome also our audience and coming along with us as we moderate this discussion today, we welcome you aboard and let's get started. So, thank you very much. So I want us to mark ourselves safe. Yes, considering the prevailing circumstances in this country. So, Alan Namu, I'm marking myself safe in Kenya from flooding. Are you safe?
For now I am. Unfortunately, I live in an area where it's a bit of a floodplain, but fortunately it hasn't gotten to our doors. So for now, yes, I am safe.
Oh, great. Rosalia, you're safe?
Yes, I am safe.
Oh, great. Yes. Rosemary.
I'm safe only as long as the rains don't continue.
Perfect. Oh, great. So today being World Press Freedom Day, and the theme this year is a press for the planet, journalism in the face of the environmental crisis. And what a better day to discuss this, looking at, we've all been following what's happening in the country, and of course, this is also a global and regional discussion. But first and foremost, I want us to talk about, when we talk about climate change, climate action, Alan, do you think this is something that we want to assume that we understand, we know, we are just following the narrative? What is the first thing that comes to your mind? Is this something that we've actually got into a point where it's well broken down, well understood, or we're just having a discussion and a narrative because it's here with us?
Well, I think Christine put it really well in her introduction. There's this understanding of what climate change is by, the evidence of our eyes. So anytime climate change is described to members of the public, it's described with these very extreme weather events as photographs, as videos, etc. Now, climate change is that, but it's also something that's cyclical. It's also something that, yes, deals with changing weather patterns and temperatures, etc. But I think what people hone in on, and they're right to do so, is that climate change has been exacerbated by industry, by the way the world has developed and shaped itself. And so I think there is possibly a good understanding of what climate change is from the evidence of our eyes, but an agreed definition on what climate change is something that I think we have yet to reach consensus on. And I'd say that it should be really something as simple as just looking at the changing weather patterns and weather environment in our world.
Oh, thank you very much. I'll come to you, Rosalia. You sit at the center of decision where narratives are being made, changed. That is the Editors Guild. Yeah. Do you think, as a representative, or let me say the CEO of Editors Guild, we are doing justice in having the conversation around climate change?
Right. Thank you, Beryl. I'd like to say that there has been quite a bit of improvement in the area of reporting climate change. And why do I say that? I say that because looking across the channels, the media channels, I think every station now has a dedicated environmental reporting segment. If we look across, recently I was in an event and a question that I asked was, there were reporters and I asked the question, do you find it hard to get your story published? Do you find it hard to get your story to the news agenda? And the response was that we no longer find it difficult. What does that mean? That means that because of the lots of awareness going on and because of the dedicated environmental segments that we have with reporters dedicated to following up after the hype, like now we have hype, then that has escalated environmental reporting, and that has also made the audiences more informed. Right now, the discourse is everybody wants to know what's happening on the environment scene because of that dedicated reporting. So yes, I think that there has been quite a lot of improvement in Kenya on environmental reporting.
Oh, perfect. Rosemary, being at the center of monitoring and control at Communication Authority, what's your observation of ground, what the press and the media is doing when it comes to matters climate change?
I'd like to echo what Rosalie has said. Yes, there's a lot going on in terms of reporting about the environment, but we have forgotten to concentrate on a certain segment, the children. Right now, when we're coming onto the panel, one of our young audience asked me, can I come? I don't think he understands what the conversation is about, but he wants to come and would like to understand what it is we are discussing. So every time we're creating content, we have forgotten to create content for the children, who are the future of this environment, who will come back and ask us, what happened to the dinosaurs? What happened to the butterflies? Because as we continue reporting, are we then reporting and taking action to protect the environment? Or will it be too late for our children's children to find dolphins, to find certain species of fish? So even as we continue, even as the media houses tackle the current issues, they need to create more content for children. I think another aspect we have forgotten to create content for is social media. What campaigns are we running on social media? It's time for us to run campaigns even on that platform that we use for more social conversations.
Great insights. So I also want to acknowledge the presence of participants who are joining us online. And on the screen, you can see a QR code for the participants' feedback. So please, you can send your feedbacks using the QR code. Also, our sign language interpreter on the screen is Christine Mora, and she'll also be helping our viewers who are following us online. So as we continue with the discussion, do we think that media or press has a role to play? And what is their role in matters climate change? Alan.
So yeah, media does have a role. It has an important role. It's the media, broadly speaking, and I'm not just talking about journalism. The media has a role in breaking down this information, but also just giving people an understanding of what the experiences of individuals, of communities, of countries are in dealing with climate change. So if I was to give an example, right, of what's happening around us today, the extreme weather events that are being witnessed in East Africa now, obviously are part of the El Nino phenomenon. As Christine had said, they've been exacerbated by the way we've planned, et cetera, et cetera. But I think sometimes there's a tendency for us to not see what the interlinkages are between one disparate issue and another. So people are making the connection between poor urban planning and flooding. but people aren't making the connection between poor urban planning and the changes in our microclimate, for instance, right? So when you get rid of trees in a specific area, and trees aren't able to sequester carbon properly, then what does that mean? It means that wherever you are, it's going to get hotter. The carbon that's supposed to be sequestered in the soil can't do so as effectively. When it rains, there's runoff, there's silt everywhere. The rivers get filled with silt. So in the dry season, it's much more difficult for you to be able to harvest water. So there's a huge interlinkage both between activities that we think are development, right? Because there's been this long-standing almost narrative that big, shiny buildings equal industrialization, equal industry, equal moving forward, right? But is that really what it is? So I think a more systemic understanding of what climate change is to us on a daily basis is something that we need to be a bit more intentional about. I think the personal stories are being told really well. And even in some areas, the environmental stories and what's happening to communities are being told really well. But what does that mean for everything? Where is the everything sort of like sentence or paragraph or set of narratives in these stories that we're telling? It can't be in every story, but it certainly should be in many stories. And I think that's one place where we need to be a bit more deliberate about the architecture of this conversation on climate change. Because if we don't understand systemically where we sit, then we are always going to be following someone else's narrative, right? So if someone else comes from a completely different climate zone and says, this is a problem, this is something that we need to deal with today, we're going to throw billions of shillings or dollars at it, and you guys must take this money. We're going to take the money, but mostly because we don't understand why this money is being given to us, right? And yet, we, as Africa, as Christine explained again, I mean, the statistics are clear. Out of those 7 out of 10 countries, I think Kenya is one of them, right? So it's important for us to grasp systemically, architecturally, what's happening around the world in order for us to lead this conversation. So that's why I think we need to be a bit more deliberate. Yeah.
Rosalia, do you think the media understand the mandate and the role that they play when it comes to reporting and telling stories around climate change?
Yes, media does understand their mandates and roles, but what I believe that there is a lack of understanding or little understanding is there is a lack of understanding or very little understanding by some of those that are charged with gatekeeping. I think climate change reporting being a specialized area, there is need for better sensitization of editors on the role so that we are then reporting beyond the crisis. When the hype fades, what are we reporting about? Editors need to be more sensitized, and reporters as well. They need to be more sensitized through continuous training on what their role should be on climate change reporting. So that once you understand the gravity of the issues, then the person in charge of gatekeeping will be the one then driving the change agenda there, will be the one encouraging reporters that, hey, these are important stories that need to be told. Not only that, but also better editing of those stories. And once there is an understanding, then less of those stories will be killed, because sometimes the reporter goes to the field but doesn't really understand the story, doesn't know how to angle the story, and finds it difficult to write great copy, which when that reaches the editor's desk, the editor sees no story. So, but with an editor that is more sensitized on the issues, they will be able to, first of all, give a good brief as the reporter leaves, and then after, when the story is brought to the newsroom, add value to the story. That way, more sensitization occurs from the newsroom, and therefore leading to more sensitization from the audiences and from members of the public. Then they are able to take they're able to be better prepared in a more proactive way, not just in a reactive way. When editors are better informed, they are able to hold authorities to account earlier on, not just when the floods occur. Earlier, we were having a conversation right here about, this very, very tired phrase of moving to higher ground. It's actually tired and also dangerous and also lacks empathy, because imagine your house is filled with water, it's flooded, the children are on the sofas trying to avoid the water, and then you are being asked to move to higher ground. That higher ground has not been defined. That higher ground, it's difficult. The government needs to put themselves in your place. What happens throughout the year? More proactive reporting is necessary. What happens? How do the people in the flooded areas, what's their life like in September when it's so sunny? December, it's so sunny and so dry. What do they do that time? Why don't we hold the government more to account during such times? What's happening at that time, and why aren't these people sensitized? Because the rainy season is a cycle. The El Nino phenomenon was announced way back. Why don't we then hold government to account to move these people to higher ground when it's still dry and less lives will be lost? So yes, more sensitization is necessary on the part of all news gatherers in those processes, because it will enable better decisions and it will also help to save lives. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Rosalia. So actually now this leads me directly to Rosemary. Considering the number of broadcasts licensed, what has been your observation when it comes to the kind of stories and the kind of news we're churning out as broadcasters? Do you think they have some value, or we're just generically reporting about climate change? What's your observation?
I would like to take that question and hand it over to the crowd.
Yes.
So that they're the recipients of what we in our former lives or in our current lives have been doing. So I would like the audience to actually answer the question in terms of what they have seen. Are they happy with what is being reported? Is there more that needs to be done? Or have they been all-encompassing? So Beryl, let's ask the audience.
Perfect.
So that it doesn't come out as the government is saying.
Yes.
But they're subject to the floods. They're subject to the news reporting. What do they think?
So the floor is open to the audience. What has been your observation when you watch the news, when you follow the stories that are being churned out in regards to what's happening in the country at the moment and issues around climate change? Anyone with observation? Okay. Please assist her with the mic. Because I also feel like in how we also tell our stories, do we feel like sometimes do we involve our participants, do we involve our citizens, or we just give them what we feel we should give them? So you have the mic, please introduce yourself.
Okay.
And proceed with your question or with your observation.
My name's Al Mombi Shahenza, and for me, I'm from Community Safety Project. Community Safety Project deals with human rights. Yeah? Okay. So those are my names. And when it comes to media, in fact, sometimes I'm going to speak the truth. Sometimes even we don't open our TVs. This is because the reports that we get, they are not satisfying. Number one, when we think about the elderly, we don't see the media people, when it comes to climate change, talking more about the elderly. For you young people, you can be able to run when the water is everywhere is full. You have the leg to move. But the elderly people, they don't have the legs to move. They cannot support them just to go up on the hills to say that they need the help. So as we have seen some various, we have seen that people, the media people have failed in one way or another. As a human rights activist, I would support you somehow I can see that you are working. And when I see a woman, because the first success started with a woman when she gives birth, and I know many women here, they have given birth. They are successful. And as I see the panels, I can also see successful women because you are there, having only one man. So that one is a plus. But let's get many plus when you are reporting about the climate change. Come to reality. Don't go sleeping with the government. Because when you take these things to be apolitical, then you will hide us what is happening in the ground. Many of us here, we are not at Madare. We are not staying at Madare. We are not staying at Kibera. We are not staying at the slums, where people are taken by this water that is going on. When it comes to Chakahora, because I'm going to take you back, we are not satisfied. When our people are dying, we are not satisfied. My dear media people, because we are here to support you, we need your support also. Because without you, we cannot go far. When you hide the news to us, what do you think?
Great.
Please,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you so much for those honest remarks. And yeah, she's actually saying that the media is in bed with the government. There are certain stories that don't actually come to play, like when you talk about how are the elderly being managed around these circumstances. Of course, this also includes the persons with disability. So, Rosemary.
If I answered that question, it would have been a difficult one for me to answer. And that's why I turned it off to the panel, so that they can tell us, they can be the judge of, as we sit here, have we done everything in our power to enable the society continue? So as she said, we have a lot we need to do, because we are not taking care of, we report, but we don't consider certain fragments of the society. Who's taking care of the elderly? Even as we do the reporting, has anyone gone into a house and shown us an elderly home? How have they been evacuated, if they've been evacuated? What happens to the children? Are we just showing the pictures and stories we want to tell? Is there more that we can do?
Yeah.
What do you think is making it difficult for us to tell this story? Are there some challenges that emanating from maybe resources, funding? What are the challenges?
No, I think definitely funding for media work generally is difficult, right? Right now, the environment has changed. Our funding models have changed or need to change, and therefore the media is under severe strain at a time when we're experiencing some of the most extreme and perhaps existential challenges that we can face as humanity. But I think it's deeper than that, and I think it would be unfair or even a little lazy for us to blame it purely on the fact that we don't have the money to do so. And here's why. The president, was it yesterday or the day before, during the meeting, the Summit of African Leaders with the World Bank and some of these multilateral financing institutions, asked for 16 trillion shillings, right? 16 trillion shillings to deal with the impacts of climate change, climate financing. And so you can see that there is money in this space. There's money not just from these multilateral financing institutions, but from private and philanthropic institutions as well that are interested in this. The fact that the question of money isn't that there is no money, it's just where is the money being directed,
Yes.
right? And I think that's, a much, much wider conversation. I think to respond to what's been said in the audience, it's that thing of seeing one story as one story and compartmentalizing climate change as stories about weather, climate change as as stories about loss, but not connecting climate change, for instance, to the impacts of the cash transfer program to elderly people in society. Because the cash transfer system is supposed to be a stopgap measure to ensure that people, for instance, who are elderly have the needs to be able to pay for their food and for their daily sustenance, right? But if people like that live in places where extreme weather events take place, shouldn't there be a budgeting complement to that cash transfer system to ensure that people have the resources to move by themselves to higher ground? Because they know the environments in which they live, right? They know the environments and what the weather patterns are. Sometimes we can be taken by surprise. But it's that enabling, that opportunity to enable citizens to be able to make decisions by themselves that is linked to resources, right? If I was to go a step further, the weather events that we're experiencing in Nairobi and in various parts of the country brought up a very interesting conversation about budgeting. There's a senator, I think it's Senator Oroba, who pointed out the fact that there's about 2% of our annual budgets that are dedicated to disaster management and disaster relief, right? Nairobi's budget is nearly 1 billion shillings.
Yeah.
1 billion shillings. So that is a clear connection between financing of the country's activities and the impacts of climate change. But that discussion happens in disparate spaces. We'll talk about the finance bill, but talk about it in terms of tax. But we don't talk about the impacts of those kinds of decisions on what's supposed to happen. So for me, it's not so much that we have a problem with money. There are challenges everywhere with money. The problem is how we are networking the thinking around all of these different elements, on all of these different threads, to look at it from a climate change perspective, right? So as has been mentioned on the panel, there are people who are now thinking about what's the environmental or climate change angle to this. It shouldn't just be them. It should be a discussion in the newsroom, during planning meetings, etc., to think about how do we slice this story up so that a person who might not necessarily be interested in what the human cost is can see that story in their lives, right? And be able to now make that connection. Because once we're able to connect that, then we can have better movement, not just led by government, because governments are led by people. In as much as people tend to think that, yes, governments are the ones who plan and lead, etc., pressure and consistent pressure, especially from the public, is going to make government plan, is going to make government act in certain ways. Right now, because people aren't seeing the whole story, then it's very difficult to pull those levers and use the power that we have constitutionally to ensure that things move. And that's why it can be a very easy straw man to blame argument to blame the government for one thing. But we should be thinking about it more architecturally. Yes, they're not responding to this current crisis fast. Why aren't they responding? Because the budgets that were dedicated were eaten by somebody. And also because there have been years of neglect of financing for disaster relief, for disaster management. And because there are certain policies and certain laws that are being put in place that are going to prevent or counteract the very serious problems that we're supposed to try and deal with. So it's architectural, yeah.
Just follow up on your point. You are an investigative, in-depth content producer, right? Do you think, as a content producer, we are telling these stories, like there is this X amount of money that was actually assigned for this job, Do we investigate and find out where was this money used? How can we account for it? Are we telling those stories? Are we holding people accountable? Are we actually addressing the gaps? Or we're just saying, fine, it did not happen, this was allocated, and we're moving on?
It's both and. So there's both that, sort of conveyor belt reporting that takes place, and there's also pockets where that kind of questioning and interrogation is taking place.
Yes.
Right? And I can see now there are people in the audience who are interested in speaking. I'll give you a great example. There's a Twitter beef. What do we call it now? Is it a tweef? A tweef? But now it's called X. So what should we call it? Swifts. So there's a Twitter beef happening right now between the CS for transport and Larry Madowo, CNN journalist, right?
Yes.
We're talking about financing for the building of an airport that serves us and serves us well, right? Larry is pointing out very glaring issues. Again, the evidence of your eyes. And what's happening is that people are now taking this as an affront to Kenya's reputation, et cetera, et cetera. But rather than be offended, nobody's asking the question, what happened to the 10 billion shillings that was dedicated to the Greenfields project that was supposed to expand our airport and make sure that we become a transport hub here? That as such a serious, such a serious installation for the public becomes victim to issues like this, right, is because A, kuna pesa ilikulwa mahali, and B, we're not preparing for these kinds of eventualities, even though we know that we are in one of the 7 out of the 10 countries that face extreme weather events. So this is what I'm talking about when trying to elevate these stories to being beyond what the current, what the current events of the day are, and sort of like look forward and see what is the impact. That's I think where the gap is. So it's going to happen, and I feel like there's a momentum and an unction for people to now start really questioning these things. And interestingly, you will find that there'll be people on social media who are doing a great job. I like to call him Kenya's anger translator, and I'm going to stop now. I've talked a lot. I like to call him Kenya's anger translator, but I'm sure people know Francis Gaitho. Like he's incredibly bellicose in the way he addresses a lot of things. But when it comes to certain issues, like he's asking very serious and very important questions.
Yeah.
How do developments that are driven by private capital interfere with an entire superhighway, as an example, right? And how come these things have happened for years? Na hakuna mtu ameuliza hiyo swali. It's a serious issue. And this is why the conversation is more about, is more than just journalism. It's about the media environment and what kind of questions are being seeded out there. Let me stop there because nimeongea sana.
Thank you very much for your consideration. So, Rosalia, are we deliberate about including our citizens and our participants in the conversation of climate change and climate narratives?
All right, I see like there is more and more of innovation in reporting, which all journalists must embrace, right? I see like there's more and more of, we call it crowdsourcing, and engaging the people that are concerned to even try to brainstorm the solutions that they would want government, solutions that they would want in their various localities. So because of competition, I feel like there is quite a lot of innovation or innovativeness in the way stories are being told, but I feel like there is still more that needs to be done. We haven't necessarily brought on board all the people that deserve to be on the editorial agenda. We haven't exhaustively told the environmental story. We haven't exhaustively included all the people that should be included. We haven't told stories about the people with disability, for instance. Rosemary mentioned children as an example. We haven't told stories of people with disability and how they are impacted. We haven't told critical stories about communities. We mostly do quite a bit of, there's a bit of we call it reactive reporting, especially for communities living in, within parks, within areas near parks. We do a bit of reactive reporting, reacting to incidents, including wildlife, human-wildlife clashes. Some of the topics are quite limited to events or occurrences or tragedies. Fine, they can act as great hooks to bring out underlying issues, underlying policy issues that need to be resolved or that need to be put in place. But more proactivity needs to go into topics that especially would allow community members to discuss their own solutions to issues. We did a pilot, or we have a program called Taking the Media to the People, where we engage community members in town hall conversations. We bring them together and allow them to tell their stories, the stories affecting their various localities. That program allowed for community members to highlight issues affecting them, highlight issues that are being ignored, and challenge editors to look out, to be more inclusive. So that program has enabled us to at least tell our editors of the need for inclusivity. So there is inclusion, but that needs to be scaled up a bit more. That needs to be scaled up a bit more through listening to what the audiences want. Yeah, disruption has made it mandatory,
Yeah.
that media houses must listen to what the audiences want.
Yeah.
If you do not give the audiences what they want, then they will go for what they want. They will look for it on various other social media platforms.
Great. Speaking of the audience, I'll come to them once Rosemary tells me about in an era of multimedia production where content is generated even on digital platform. Do you think we are telling local stories or global stories mostly? And are we actually utilizing the digital platforms from where you sit?
From where I sit, Kenyans have really embraced the platforms. And I say that because half the conversations on this panel were about not necessarily legendary media and where we are asking fundamental questions. Now, the question I would like to pose is that even as I post, as an individual, is it about the bashing? Or am I doing the bashing and also offering a solution? Because we can keep saying it's bad, it's bad, it's bad, it should have been done. Now that we are here, what am I as an individual doing? Because we all have the platforms. Are you using your platform to help? Are you using your platform to bash? Are you using your platform to offer a solution? So again, it goes back to individuals. The environment changing and the floods as we're currently experiencing is not an individual issue. It's not in some areas alone. We are all affected by the floods. If it's not by virtue that the road has been swept away, so we will have to pay more taxes to get that road back, it is because food production has been interfered with. But what are we doing as individuals to ensure that, yes, this has happened now, that next year we'll not be having the same conversation? A while ago, we had a meme of Serikali's idea. are we going to continue using the platforms, using legendary media to keep saying Serikali Saidia? I am the government. You are the government. What are you doing as an individual to make sure that the environmental conversation is carried forward?
Our audience, what are you doing as an individual before we tell the government that money was set aside to do this? Do you think you have a role to play in your capacity? I hereby open the floor to the audience to answer that question and to also throw in the question. Yes, madam? Tell us your name, please.
Thank you.
You can stand up.
Thank you. My name is Rose Lucalo, and I'm not going to allow you to throw that thing to us without us discussing the role of government, because I think government has abdicated its role completely. Yes, the media has shortcomings. Yes, it could include more voices.
Sorry, I don't think we are able to hear you. Or you can try and project your voice.
My voice is not always the loudest, so let me just wait for this. Yeah, I was saying that we can't just brush away the role of government. And I think it's a very big question in the performance of the media. The government does not understand the role of media in society. I am an older member of the media fraternity, and I can tell you it was easier to report under Moi than it is to report under Uhuru and Ruto. They don't give answers. There are things that we do at the grassroots. Our role is to highlight. Our role is to highlight what's happening at the grassroots and seek answers from the public that we represent. But when you go to the grassroots, you go to great effort to find this. I look at John Allen's reports. The data is with the government. The information is with the government. If you look at the flooding today, Nairobi has no business flooding. It is 5,000 feet above sea level. Water should flow. It means we have blocked all the paths. But try asking for the plans of this city. Try asking for what has been blocked. Try asking for how the person got that land or that passage or what corruption led to that. We keep going round.
Sorry, just hold on to your thoughts a bit. We get your mic.
Here,
So,
I think she can use.
okay. Sorry. Thank you, Alan.
The mic doesn't want me to speak. So there was the Met Department, if you go to their website and even on their social media, they were sharing some maps of what's happening with the rain patterns. It is very clearly located around urban areas, you know? So Nairobi is the worst, you know? It's actually an emergency center in terms of the rain we should expect, leave alone what has happened. They're telling us today to expect today and tomorrow and Saturday some of the worst rain, you know? Try asking why. Does this have any relationship with urban planning, with the concrete jungle we have built? You know, I mean, these are such important things. And I think these are things that we must insist are answered. I've raised it with governors, I've raised it with cabinet secretaries. When you ask questions, the response is to stonewall. They will give you no answer. And then the public blames the media. Why aren't you giving us answers? The government is not answering any questions. You ask a question, they'll tell you, oh, we'll get back to you. You'll wait. You send emails, they'll answer the first phone call, then they'll stop taking your calls, you know? That is the reality of what media is dealing with. So I have a lot of criticisms for media. There's lots of things we can improve, but it's no use improving those things if it doesn't translate to a consolidated response for what the public wants to know.
Oh, great. Remind me your name, please.
Rose Lucalo.
Rose Mukando. Actually, have great contribution to this discussion. She's talking about lack of information, lack of data, and lack of inadequate governance when it comes to climate change and climate action in this country. Anyone with another question, please? Yeah?
Hi, my name is Charlene. I'm a tech and human rights campaigner at Amnesty International. I don't really have a question, just a comment to a previous question that you asked about if we think the media is doing enough. Having worked with a lot of grassroots organizations and in communities, the climate crisis phenomenon is only familiar with the middle class, with us who work here. So I feel like one thing the media can do to kind of bring visibility to the situation, even the one that we are in right now, is probably help the public understand more. What do we mean by climate crisis? What does that mean for us? What does that mean for us in 10 years? How is that going to affect us? What does that mean for the people in Wajir, in Turkana, you know, and for the rest of us? So yeah, that's my contribution. As for what I'm doing as a person, I am donating. Thank you.
Perfect, Charlene, perfect. So Charlene is saying, what does this mean to us and other parts of the country 10 years from now? And Sandra, your question? And Sandra will be taking us through some exhibition after our tea break. So she'll show us the impact of climate change towards the end of this conversation. Sandra, go ahead.
Thank you so much. It's still morning. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So my thank you to the panelists by the great discourse. My maybe response to Rosemary's idea that individuals should take responsibilities and all that. Yes, we are not disputing that fact, but according to data and maybe from what we've seen recently, and from my research, I feel like most of the people who are actually affected mainly by these climate calamities and the crisis are mainly the rural communities, like smallholder farmers, and the extremely poor people, like what we can see in Madare, like the people who can't even help themselves, and what we saw in Kijabe, Maimahiu, those are guys in the rural areas. Maybe they don't even have phones to post on social media and tell us, hey guys, this is the information, this is what's happening. If Kinalari didn't have the choppers to maybe enable them get to those spaces, maybe we wouldn't have even known what's happening to them, So in terms of also just the media being able to report all this, people need resources by then. Alan, you were saying it's not about the funding sometimes, but we know it's about the money for you to be able to go out there and tell these stories. Even for us freelance journalists, you see something that you want to do. I was telling my friend Patrick, good photographer by the way, and he's covering the floods right now. But as a freelance, how do you get to that place? How do you get to tell these stories? I want to do the stories from the perspective of children and women. But I have to wait for the floods to at least subside because, I don't have a big vehicle to enable me go right in the middle of where these things are happening. So we rely for help in the bigger media houses who are maybe in bed with the government, hence why maybe we do not get the answers, because there's nothing that we'll do, whether they give you the answers or not, there's nothing you'll do to them. They'll still have their positions, they'll still be in their seats. Still a bigger problem. So I didn't have a question, it's just a comment because I'm also wondering what to do as a freelance journalist. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra, for that intriguing comment. And Alan already talked about funding and how the funding is being distributed. But this one now, I want to shoot it to Rosalia. Of course, funding is at the center of this. Do you think the media is getting the funding that's always allocated for climate change, climate action mitigation? And what are some of the successful and the good examples of partnerships that emanate from partners when it comes to climate change and climate action coverage for media?
All right. So what we know is that newsrooms are highly constrained to the extent that during the international conferences, such as the Climate Change Conference of Parties, what we usually have is journalists getting funding from external sources. There are quite a number of organizations, independent organizations, that give journalists the money to cover these events without strings attached, because they are media development organizations whose outcomes really are effective reporting, and they want the story out. So those are some of the institutions, or those are some of the channels that journalists should cash in on. There's quite a number, such as the Climate Change Media Partnership, Palita, and a fund for investigative journalism. Those are institutions that are really dedicated to promoting independent journalism, so that even freelancers can tap into them. Of course, they do have rigorous application processes, and you really must submit lots of work, and they are highly competitive because they are global. That is one of the ways where journalists can cash in on. We have various fellowships. That way, journalists can cash in on those, because the funding is really restricted to newsrooms. But on the local front, Rose Lucalo said that media doesn't understand, government needs to play a bigger role. We have been clamoring for a fund called the Media Fund, Media Sustainability Fund, a fund that would be anchored in law, a fund that has worked in various jurisdictions in different countries such as South Africa, and I think Sierra Leone also have developed a framework that is under testing. And we really hope that we will be able to find an ideal governance framework to be able to push forward our agenda for getting such a media sustainability fund, because it is necessary to keep independent journalism going. Otherwise, at this rate where media houses are struggling to pay their journalists, that means that they will be struggling to send journalists. So will they choose between paying, the backlog of salaries, or will they be sending a reporter to cover an important international convention, the Conference of Parties, that requires more money? So these are some of the avenues we hope to push forward. We hope that this can be achieved. So we are still pushing for that media diversity fund, which will help to cushion media houses and offer some relief during times of disruption and during times of less funding. Then there was the other bit of the question,
which was about, actually you've answered all of it. I was talking about the partnerships when it comes to funding. I think you talked about fellowship and some of the partnerships that have worked well.
Yes, on the bit of partnerships. So yeah, let me just weigh in on the bit of partnerships. We're seeing more and more of foundations and donor agencies are looking up to consortiums, collaborations. And I think that should be the way to go, looking just forward to bringing together, different entities that have the same common agenda, because the impact is wider, the reach is greater. So let us de-silo, which I think we've done. In the past, journalism has really been in a silo, so that we find it difficult to partner with CSO, with other civil society organizations. I think we've made some milestones. I can give an example of the 2022 general elections, where we partnered with various institutions to mount a presidential debate, the presidential debate 2022.
Yeah.
It was not by the media fraternity alone. No, we partnered with civil society institutions, like-minded institutions that are interested in promoting good governance and accountability and free and fair elections and democracy. So look at what your values are and partner with such institutions. We've partnered with HIVOS. We've partnered with Africa Uncensored in a HIVOS program to mount an investigative journalism training for reporters. So look at break those silos and skate to, different funding opportunities. Let's embrace the collaborations so that we have reporters in the southern region collaborating with reporters in Kenya, for instance, so that where we have Ethiopian reporters who cannot tell their story, they throw it into John Allan Namu and his institution, and they publish it, because we must also be alive to the threats that face media. We must be alive to the threats that face media in intolerant regimes. If we have journalists in Uganda who have great stories but they can't publish, they push it to Kenya, in the spirit of solidarity. Because you still must ensure that your reporters' lives are secured, even as they do those dangerous stories. So let's embrace solidarity, let's embrace collaborations, and even as we wait for that Media Sustainability Fund, let us cash in and milk and compete for the various avenues that have been presented to us, because they are there. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Rosalia. Thank you. You've mentioned some of the partnerships you've also had with Africa Uncensored. And of course, now that we are encouraging also independent media houses, independent content production, content producers, and Alan Namu is in that space. And of course, you might not be able to churn out content as mainstream media does it, but when you do it well. How have you done it?
Well, I think, so how we've done it is our focus is more thematic than it is on daily events. So for the past 2 years, we've had like a focus on 3 main themes, and then we have sub-themes. So we focused on debt, corruption, and climate change as some of our main themes. And that allows us a flexibility to look at various stories within those 3 pillars, but also when other things come up, then we're able to take a look at that. The second thing is our storytelling. Our storytelling, we try and make our storytelling more evergreen. So when I talk about talking about systemic issues and linking them to everyday challenges, that's what I mean. So that if you watch a story today, it might be about the floods today, but if you watch it next week or next year or in 3 years, it still makes sense. So as an example, we produced a story about climate refugees by Cynthia Gishiri about 2 years ago. The climate refugee crisis is something that's not just local, that is exacerbated by extreme weather events here, but it has global geopolitical discussions. Look at the discussions and look at the kind of politics that's starting to form in countries like Italy, for instance, or countries like Greece, or even other countries like Sweden, for instance, who have seen a huge influx of refugees from the global south, many of whom are climate refugees, right? Look at what kind of lines and fault lines are forming around that. So when you tell stories that are more systemic and more evergreen, it allows for people to interact with them from a point of view of knowledge and insight, and not so much, what's happening on the daily beat. That's not to say that there isn't room for daily beat reporting. I think there is room. But I think that the most important thing is for journalists to recognize that their role is moving more away from informing, right, of what's happening on the day-to-day, and more towards context, providing context. Why? Why is this happening? Who is behind this? What are the pillars of what's happening? So when you focus on context-led reporting, then it gives you a far better opportunity to A, take time, and be able to do this, and B, produce content that then has a longer shelf life. On funding, I just wanted to correct something. It's not that, I think what I said was, it's not that the money doesn't exist or that the money isn't important. It's where the money is being prioritized, right? So when I mentioned 16 trillion shillings for climate financing, you'll find that a huge amount of that is going to go into a lot of admin, right? But when thinking about how to communicate with the public, that's an incredibly important part of how to be able to inform changes in our attitudes around climate change, etc. So it's more a question of prioritization. And again, this is why the conversation needs to happen, yes, at the grant-making level, but also at that top level. What is the impact or the importance of storytelling in being able to inform and change or shape narratives? Look at what happened during COVID, right? Yeah. Look at the kind of groundswell of misinformation and disinformation that came out of there being a poor or underfed information environment or ecosystem around health reporting. It had a huge impact that possibly even led to loss of life. So you can't leave out storytelling, you can't leave out journalism, you can't leave out the media when thinking about how to be able to finance the question of changes in the climate. So I guess that's my point. And
perfect. So you're saying
let me leave
actually
there, yeah.
media should also be part and parcel of people who are being funded so that they can walk the journey together with everyone.
Exactly.
Because in as much as we're going to do civic education, but the media platform also serves a role, right? It
does. And the question about media sustainability, again, is a question that we should all think about very seriously. Because if you have an underfed, malnourished media environment, media ecosystem, that opens up the way for all sorts of disinformation, where there aren't people who are arbiters of the information that the public receives that are working in the public's interest. And if that media sustainability fund doesn't exist, then that shrinks the number of people who can actually dedicate time and resources to be able to do this work. So my colleague, for instance, who's in the audience, wouldn't have that and would constantly have to look outside for the kind of funding that we need. This is why it's important. It's not just important for the sake of paying salaries, but it's important because of the role that the media performs on a day-to-day basis.
Perfect. So there's a point that actually came up, lack of access to data when it comes to climate change and climate action and reporting. Rosemary, why are we having such kind of gaps at this time and at this point? Because we've been to COP28, we've been to COP27, COP26, now we are going to COP29. And still in Kenya, it's so hard to access such kind of data.
Data is an interesting question. And for this society, we haven't prioritized data. Let's be honest. We as a society have not prioritized how many people have died, say from the flooding system this time around. Do we have an accurate figure?
We approximate.
We approximate.
Yeah.
So when you come and ask me for an accurate figure as a government institution, and you want me to tell you how many people have died, yet I do not have accurate numbers from the ground, rather than speculate, I will not answer your question because I don't have that data. Basically, it's about us not having prioritized. We've never quite understood or learned or prioritized data gathering in this country. Yeah.
So that's a gap that's missing.
It is a gap that is missing. Because even if you look at the media houses and I ask you, how much does it cost to produce one statement, one segment of news? Is there a media house that can tell me how much it costs? One segment of news. So that even as we point fingers towards the government, even in your own house, can you tell me how much it costs to put a plate of food on the table? Have we become that granular, even in our own homes? If we haven't done that, then you are expecting the government, which is you and I, to give you answers in a granular form, yet you don't know them. You don't. How many cars How many people are in this forum today? Do we know?
Approximately 50, 20.
Exactly. So if we are struggling even in this sitting, this one here,
Yeah.
then how else do you expect other sittings to be able to give you that which you're asking for, that which you require?
Yes, Alan.
And respectfully, I just want to disagree slightly. Look, the government is you and I. I agree. It is a government that is made to serve members of the public. But the government has institutions whose job it is to be able to gather this kind of data. The Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, for instance, gathers data on all sorts of different metrics. So, for instance, it would know by approximation and extrapolation from the last census how many people are living in flood-prone areas. That number then can lead, to better planning around disaster management. So I think there's this idea that because we don't, collect data with such granularity on a daily basis, then the expectation is that the government shouldn't. But the government has the capacity, the resources, and the institutions to be able to do this consistently. So and it's in various ways. So. To give an example of what's happening in Nairobi, with quite, with quite a bit of speed, the government was able to tell which places are flood prone, how many people are in that area, what kind of interventions need to be made. I think the question is the government doing what it is supposed to be doing, and with within a timely fashion? That's really the debate from where I sit, and I can understand your point of view, because when you sit in government and you don't have access to certain things, it then becomes frustrating to be able to respond to things when you don't have the answers at your disposal. But look, those answers really exist within government, and it's a question for me that I think was raised by Bitang and Demo a number of years ago when instituting certain policy frameworks around open governance. How much data does the public have access to, and how regularly can it access this data? This is why the Commission for Administration of Justice sits and has the Office of the Ombudsman within it, because the Office of the Ombudsman is really the key office where members of the public can go and seek information from the public if they're not getting it. It is whether those people who are in those institutions work, or we still have that attitude of serikali ni sirikali, and therefore the data that is owned by the government is to be doled out to the public on a needs basis, on an as and when is needed. If we were to change our perspective and our attitude and really think about members of the public as being deserving of as much data as possible, then you'd be surprised at the kind of data and insight that could flourish in Kenya with just that attitude shift. I'll give just one example. A lot of the reporting that we've produced between 2018 and 2020 on procurement-led corruption actually came from the government. Why? Because the government portal on tenders.go.ke became open and accessible to the public. So then now we can search for companies, we can search for beneficial owners, that in eCitizen I can look for a CR12 with 650 shillings. It should be cheap or near free in my view. But if I can look for information on a company that is supposedly building some sort of construction in a riparian area, find out who the owner is, and therefore be able to ask better quality questions, that's information that's with government. So, I mean, respectfully, I see where you're coming from, but I disagree in terms of the role that government should and is playing and the amount of data that it has at its disposal. I think that the government, it's really a question of attitude on how we treat that data and who we think should access that data. That's my view.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, look, 'cause areas like Northeastern, Northeastern suffers the extremes. They suffer during drought and they suffer during flooding. Yes. So those are areas that actually we might not have the data right now on what's happening and what has been happening in the month of April, but there are areas that we should actually be having them. So, did you conclude on your answer? Perfect. So I want us to move first into way forward as media. What will actually help us give out, churn out stories that will actually inform, educate, and create narratives that can also impact the society? Because sometimes maybe the government that might not know the priorities of the people, or the people themselves don't even know what they need to do from where they are. So what are some of the steps we would urge the media and organization to take when it comes to climate change, climate action, misinformation, and mainstreaming of what needs to be done in matters climate action and climate change? Alan,
Okay, so one of the things is what we've just discussed. It's the quality of the information that the members of the public have access to. So again, government is a very, very big source of and recipient of information about the public and for the public. So yes, that's the first thing, which then now what that denotes is that there should be a shift in how government treats this kind of information, where the information is accessible, and also the people who are supposed to give that information should really shift their attitudes in how that happens. I think the second thing, and as has been discussed throughout this panel, is better collaboration, right? Yeah. So better collaboration between media houses, legacy media houses, new media players, independent journalists, and members of the public in being able to see the bigger story. The third thing, again, that had been mentioned here is a question of audience, right? A lot, and this is where I think there was a lady from Amnesty who was talking about, people in urban areas being better informed about climate change. I think there's some truth to that. But if you ask a person in Wajir what climate change means, they'll give you a very good quality answer because they experience it. And sometimes it's also looking at the question of what is knowledge and what do we perceive as knowledge or insight or information? Is it packaged in the way that we're packaging it today? Or is it the kind of nuanced knowledge that you get from the ground that is harnessed through experience? And that kind of conversation between ourselves and our audiences and thinking about our audience and ourselves as part of a community will be something that can be very transformative. The final thing is and I've been harping on about this, is really looking at what the global systemic issues are around climate change, so that we are not led by other agendas and we can lead our own agenda. I disagree, this is my final thing, I promise. Okay. I disagree with a lot of what's happening in Uganda. I disagree with the manner and the style in which Yoweri Museveni has led his government, just on various bases. But if you heard what he said at this last summit, he said something very pointed at the global institutions that then are talking about the architecture for financing of climate change. You can't talk about climate change and you can't talk about human development if you don't fund the very tools that you require for human development, economic advancement to take place. So you'll fund a capacity building program, but you won't fund a railway line. You won't fund markets. You won't fund development banks. You won't fund the instruments that then can enable members of the public to determine their own destiny. That's a very urgent question about the architecture of climate change, because at the end of the day, it will be that the polluter pays principle will be now like the framework for which we discuss climate change. Because I have the money and I pollute, therefore if I pay for a carbon sink somewhere else, then I'm fine and I can wash my hands off of this climate nonsense. right? But what if it was us who are actually saying, no, actually you can't do that. That's not how climate change works. This is how it's supposed to work. And therefore the money that you're giving, not only is it not a request, it's a demand, right? And this is why talking about the architecture of climate financing, talking about the definition of climate change and how it affects people, but also who it affects, will radically change how we discuss things globally. You know, what's happening in the UK with them bringing refugees into Rwanda. If you think about it also from a climate change perspective, or if you think about it in terms of the power difference between ourselves and the United Kingdom and countries in the global north, transpose that discussion to a climate change discussion, you will find that Africa will likely have much more reason to export people in the other direction. You understand? Or to have a more balanced conversation about how things take place. But it's not happening because we're not seeing this as part of a wider arc or part of a wider narrative that we ought to be discussing. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Rosalia?
Picking it up from where he's talked about the climate financing and such like topics, one of the key issues that we need to look at is, you know, the divide between academia and industry. The kind of training that goes in there, we need to continuously offer capacity building and continuous training programs so that editors and reporters are more sensitized, are continuously sensitized on what to report on in climate change. This would even encourage, you know, specialization. So right now, Kenya Editors Guild, we have been doing a series of trainings or gap assessment on climate change reporting, and the end goal is to have a curriculum, which we hope can be embedded in an institution of higher learning, so that people go to the university and they are specializing in an area called climate change reporting. And the idea is to bring on board key areas that we talk about once a year or twice a year, so that people get trained, so that people can specialize in such areas of energy, climate finance, climate health, and very many other topics. So continuous training is key. Then John Allen talked about the quality of information that's being given. How will we uphold that? Editors must be then transparent about the news gathering processes. How did you arrive at this? Were you sharing fake pictures, you know? So with transparency in the news gathering processes, then we will be able to eliminate fake news, misinformation, and disinformation. Because fake news is spread by just forwarding. You know, you get something and you forward without verifying. But if we are transparent about the news gathering processes, yes, I did this, he said this, I've quoted him, he said this, why? Because I interviewed him, right? So if we encourage that transparency, then we will safeguard legacy media from the from the dangers of misinformation and disinformation that have infiltrated the journalism space. Then I talked about this when the hype fades. What should we do? Right now, there's so much reportage on, you know, flooding. During the COVID season, if we have to, you know, just flash back to that time, everyone overnight was transitioned into a health journalist. But what has happened? When that hype fades, what do? We need to focus on policy implications. We need to focus on solutions-based journalism. We need to go back to those communities, right? Go back to those communities in December when it's dry. What are they doing then? And what is government doing? Let them move to higher ground then, when they are able to, when there is no flooding in their sitting rooms, right? Let us, for editors, we really must do day 1, day 2, and day 3 journalism, and then week 4 journalism. We really must keep on doing journalism, we really must keep on following up when the hype fades. Thank you.
Oh, great. Thank you. Rosemary.
A lot has been said. But there's a community we have forgotten.
Yes.
Forget about the children. Grassroots. What are we doing to educate them? To bring them on board about these conversations? Yes, they could answer what climate change is, but then even after they answer the question, then what? Are we engaging them in coming up with solutions, homegrown solutions, or are we hoping that we will go and impose on them the solutions we think will work for Mandera, and we're coming from Nairobi, will work for Kitui, and you're coming from Nairobi? We need to start an affirmative action of where solutions are grown from the community. That is one. Then two, the media within that community needs to start embracing climate change, so that it's not a report on when the floods arrive. It's a conversation of the floods have come, they have left, what can we do better? So the next time, if they come, then we're better prepared. So for me, grassroots is where the whole conversation needs to start happening.
Oh, perfect. Okay, my parting shot would be, I think it has to be a collective and a concerted effort from all actors, be it the state actors, faith actors, because I believe that anytime we talk about this, of course, the bottom starts by the state actors. Yet, if the same people, if the president, the governors, anytime they want to be elected, they go to church, they ask the priests and the pastors to pray for them so that they can be elected. And these are the only people who will tell them, kneel down, I pray for you, and they obey and they listen. Then a church can also be used, or let me talk about faith spaces to mitigate climate change and climate action. So this being World Press Freedom Day, I hereby bring the discussion to a close. But just before we leave, we are going to take a break it's a health break. Then Sandra, come and tell us what should we expect for ahead of the exhibition after the health break. You can just give us a brief on what to expect.
Thank you once more. I think for me, there's not much to say. Oh, sorry, I want to block you guys. Okay. There's not much to say for those who've had the opportunity of, looking at the pictures. Those were taken some time back when the region was going through, the catastrophic period of drought. And if you look at them and then look at us right now, I mean, there's stark contrast between what was happening back then and what we are experiencing right now. And from the look of things and what we are reading and the El Nino phenomenon that is happening right now in Africa, and maybe even the world over, we know there's some countries in Africa right now that are experiencing droughts. I mean, we see that it's not something that is going to go away anytime soon. Hence, we realize the importance of media, importance of storytelling, in whatever capacity that you are in. So for today, I'll not be giving a talk or anything, just engage with the photos. That was done in the year 2022 in a village in Kajiado called Imparbali. And these people, they know, I think, as Rosemary mentioned, that we need to go to them and listen to the solutions that they have towards the problems that they are facing. It's not something that is new to them. They know the problems that they have, and they know the solutions that need to be done. Problem is they don't have the capacity. Some of them are not able to do it on their own. Some of them have tried approaching their leaders, but the same stories they get because the leaders are not accessible. Some of them are in Nairobi. Accessing this village was not quite easy, even just for us. But we went, reported, and we didn't disappear. And I think that's the other major part that I want to bring to your attention as maybe a media practitioner. Sometimes you'll go into these spaces and you just can't report and disappear because there's your human side as well. So from this exhibition, you were able to raise funds for that same village. And I can say, like 2 years on, there's now a school that was built there. There's a church that went and dug a borehole and just, cater to the needs of what they actually wanted. So from their point of view, we didn't go to them with the solutions. They got to give us their solutions. So yeah, and thank you. In case of any questions, you can reach me. Yes, I will. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you very much. Please allow me to, okay, a round of applause for Sandra, please. Thank you. So allow me to thank our panel of experts, Jonala Namo, Rosalia Omungo, and Rosemary Mwangi. Thank you very much for creating time, for being here to have this discourse. And without forgetting our participants online, those who joined us. We were not able to sample some of their questions, but I guess we'll get those feedback online with them. And also to just send my special thanks to our audience for your intriguing contributions, for your active participation, and for the questions that were raised during our discussion. Thank you so much. So let's take the health break, then we continue with the exhibitions later. Thank you very much. Bye.